Ladies and gentlemen of the press, the Military Committee Chiefs of Defence session has just drawn to a close. We will now have a joint press conference of the Chair of the Military Committee, Admiral Bauer, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Cavoli, and the Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, General Lavigne. Each military leader will have a short opening statement and we will take questions afterwards. Admiral Bauer, may I invite you to take the floor?
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We have just concluded the Military Committee in Chiefs of Defence session. The focus of this meeting was on collective defence. Russia's unprovoked and brutal war in Ukraine has ushered in a new era for global security. Together, the Allied Chiefs of Defence and their counterparts from invitees Finland and Sweden discussed the ways in which NATO is reinforcing its deterrence and defence. We have shown the world that we are capable of quickly scaling up our presence wherever and whenever necessary. During this meeting, we have discussed the many ways in which we will strengthen our hard power. This means that NATO and national military planning will be more closely linked than ever before, and that our rapid deployable forces will be able to perform with unprecedented speed and flexibility. Yesterday, we discussed with the NATO Deputy Secretary General how we are implementing the decisions about our posture that were taken by the political leadership during the NATO summit in Madrid, and what still needs to be done in the run-up to the summit in Vilnius. Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Cavoli, provided us with his strategic considerations on the eastern flank and across the whole spectrum of our 360-degree approach to security, and how we will operationalize and implement the deter and defend strategy that we approved in 2020. Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, General Lavigne, provided us his insights into balancing capability and capacity and shared with us the strategic observations from the war in Ukraine. Today, we dedicated a special session to the military situation in and around Ukraine. On behalf of the Ukrainian Chief of Defense, General Zaluzhny, the military representative of Ukraine, Major General Serhiy Salkutsan, detailed the Ukrainian strategic objectives and the support that is required to obtain those objectives. The Chiefs of Defense reaffirmed their unrelenting support and commended the Ukrainian military leadership for the practical, tactical brilliance with which they are outmaneuvering their opponent time and time again. NATO will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. In Ukraine, we are seeing a willingness across all generations and across all parts of society to fight for their freedom. They prove to the world that what resilience truly means. We can all learn from that. And in fact, we should all learn from that. Because in this new era of collective defense, we need all allied societies to place more emphasis on resilience, to be always able to expect the unexpected. During this meeting, we looked at how we can help our 3.2, soon to be 3.5, with Finland and Sweden, million men and women in uniform to perform their sacred task in keeping 1 billion citizens safe. Today, the Chiefs of Defense met with their K4 operational partners, being Armenia, Austria, Finland, Ireland, Moldova, Sweden, Switzerland, and Ukraine, to discuss the situation on the ground and the security environment. We also discussed NATO's non-combat and capacity building mission in Iraq with our operational partners Sweden, Finland, and Australia. Both in KFOR and in NMI, allied men and women in uniform are doing outstanding work to promote stability and security. But the responsibility for freedom does not fall on the shoulders of those in uniform alone. In this new era of collective defense, it is up to us all to prevent conflicts from escalating, to show resilience, and to be ready to expect the unexpected. I will now give the floor to our Supreme Allied Commander. First, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Cavoli. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you a little bit today. And I thought I might take a few minutes to talk to you about the changes that we're making in the alliance to reinforce both stability and security as we go forward. So following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the alliance very quickly fundamentally changed its posture. We activated our strategic plans, and this dramatically allowed us to increase our military presence on the eastern and southeastern borders of the alliance. We began conducting enhanced vigilance activities in all domains in air, land, sea, space, and cyber. We rapidly reinforced our presence on the ground on the eastern flank with thousands of troops, hundreds of aircraft, and dozens of ships within just days of the conflict's outbreak. We doubled the number of battle groups under NATO control in the eastern part of the alliance from 4 to 8, and now we have increased our ability to reinforce them up to brigade level upon need. This strengthened posture has and will continue to shield all allies. It represents the most significant reinforcement of our collective defense since the end of the Cold War. Our new strategy for the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, which Rob alluded to a moment ago when he described the DDA, this has focused us back onto collective defense. So for some years, for many years, we were focused on crisis management and out-of-area operations, and we have resolved with this new strategic approach to return our primary focus to the task of collective territorial defense. This has profound implications. During the Madrid summit, we received clear guidance and a mandate to turn DDA as a strategy into a set of fully executable plans. And this will mean changes to our current plans, structures, posture, and readiness levels. We are now in the process of implementing and developing a family of plans that describe how the alliance will operate in peace, crisis, and war to provide for collective defense. National military plans will be interlinked again with alliance plans, and all 30 NATO allies will have a harmonized planning blueprint that will incorporate national forces and capabilities into our deterrence posture for the entire European area of operations. This DDA family of plans, as we call it, is a key. It will drive our structure, our operations, our activities, and our investments into the future. It will result in changes to include in our command and control structures. So as work continues on these plans, it remains a team sport. Our strongest and most enduring advantage will continue to be the unmatched unity of this alliance. And that means we are able to connect them together into a system of collective defense that ensures and will continue to ensure no ally is left alone to deal with any security challenge that this alliance might face. Thank you again. I look forward to your questions. And to the chairman, as always, I thank you for your ability to convene this magnificent group of chiefs of defense and Philippe and myself in order to have the profound sorts of discussions we enjoy today.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a result of working hand in hand with SACEUR, we have just delivered our thoughts about this unjustified invasion in Ukraine. And I obviously can't tell you everything, but will follow some highlights. This war in Ukraine does not call into question our two main concepts, the DDA and the NATO warfighting capstone concept. On the contrary, the conflict shows that we are going in the right direction and prompt us to accelerate their implementation. So first related to the continuing process of shaping and contesting. This conflict demonstrates that military instruments of power are not exclusive. There are other levers at play, economic, informational, cultural. And the ability to shape and contest below the threshold of war and during the fight is key. We need to leverage the informational sphere, the cognitive dimension, cyber and space, and to take into account non-state actors who play a significant role, as we've seen, for example, in space. Second, more timely, what is the fight itself telling us? In such a high-intensity scenario, hard power and logistics are paramount. It underlines the importance of attrition and consumption and the industry's ability to consider it. When we reflect on our ability to generate effects as allies, to generate operational capacity to fulfill NATO's plan, we need to address the balance between the capability and capacity, the quantity and the quality. And this balance needs continuous attention in the light of current trajectories in which quantity is decreasing and quality is increasing. An observation in Ukraine demonstrates the strong performance of smaller, higher quantity platform making use of current technology. But in the same time, we also observe the combination of high technology, space, hypersonic, and the Uberization of the battlefield. We need quality and quantity to keep the advantage. Of note, the conflict underlines also the fundamental importance of non-material aspect. I mean, multi-domain operation, readiness, modern command and control, cognitive superiority, situation awareness, persistent preparation, realistic training, resilience, and of course, morale and leadership. And it's already addressed in the two concepts. So now we have to implement them. And at the end of the day, the agility and the flexibility that the Ukrainian shows on the field during wartime and which make their strength inspire us and validate the way we consider future warfare development to preserve peace and protect our freedom. And as a result, you may ask me the so what question. Within the nation, our inclusive work on this strategic consideration is ongoing process. It will become lessons learned to implement with in mind to strengthen NATO's added value, the interoperability. And at a time when it is challenged by digital era, we must continue our work to improve interoperability and expedite NATO's digital transformation as written in the strategic concept. Let's not assume that taking into account today's lesson will be enough to preserve the Article 5 credibility. NATO has a more global vision that we call the 360 approach. Keeping the advantage is always a question of speed and, for example, related to decision making. It is the combination of agility, flexibility, rapid decision-making, moral strength, the appropriate use of cyber and space domain that make Ukrainians effective today. This is why NATO is now moving towards multi-domain operation to support the operational capacity and keep the advantage tomorrow with a collective approach. Finding the right balance between the large and few versus the small and many, with the need for further study, conceptual work, wargaming, including command and control consideration. And of course, to finish, the nation approved before the February 24 last year, two military concepts, the DDA and the NWCC. The assumptions made in this concept are still valid in the light of the war in Ukraine. Therefore, the first main lesson of this conflict is that we have to accelerate the implementation of these two military concepts. And for 20 years now, ACT has looked to the future to enhance alliance military instrument of power, and we will, on the 7th of June, mark our first 20 years in Norfolk, NATO's home in North America. And so with this, CMC Secure and I stand ready to answer your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will now open up the floor, and we will start with Deutsche Welle.
To all of you, from a strictly military perspective, how essential is it for Ukraine to get tanks? The tanks that they are now asking for, the Leopards that some countries are willing to send and some countries are not. And how, separately, on the question of ammunition and artillery, the Ukrainians have been saying for a long time, or they had been saying, that they were short on ammunition and that this could win or lose the war. How well have you done on opening up production lines, speeding up the production, specifically on ammunition and artillery? Thank you.
It's not so much us opening production lines. I mean, that is not the work of the military. The military is the chiefs of defense of the nations. They order, they basically formulate operational requirements, and then there's another part of the organization that starts ordering it, the material directors. It is, the issue is here that in many cases you need investors, which is private investors, to invest in the defense industry, and then you need that industry to make a decision to increase the production capacity so that they can actually produce higher numbers, which is necessary. The discussion so far has been that at least we have been successful, I would say, in transferring that requirement of higher production numbers to the political side and now into industry as well. And I think what is happening now is that there is, it will take a bit of time to transfer that into the right sort of investments in the industry to then increase the production capacity. And even that will take time, because if they invest in another production line, for example, that will take an investment and a production of the production line. It's all unfortunate, but that's what it is. And it's the result of just in time, just enough way of looking at our economy. Stocks were actually not favorable. And we have seen with the pandemic in medical equipment, and now in a war with capabilities and equipment and ammunition, that stocks are necessary when everyone needs it at the same time, especially with the rate of use in Ukraine and on the Russian side, by the way, at the same time. The Russians have a similar problem as the Ukrainians, because this is not just a war of the future, this is a war of the past as well, and it's been fought today. It's trench warfare of 1914, 1918, and there is cyber and drones and things like that. So it is a combination of very old and very new at the same time today. And one of the things that we thought was something of the past is extremely high ammunition rates that we have seen on both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, actually on the Russian side even more than on the Ukrainian side. And everyone will have to adjust to it. On the military side, with what you have, you will fight. And then, of course, everybody's now asking for more ammunition. And I think we have the ability in the West to be better at that than the Russians. Because we have the money, we have the creativity, we have the ability to scale, but it requires focus.
Thank you very much. Next question is for...
Well, the tank question is, in a war like it is being fought, every type of equipment is necessary. And the Russians are fighting with tanks, so the Ukrainians need tanks as well. And it was General Cavoli that said this very rightfully so. If you have a tank on the other side opposing you, you better have a tank. So I think it is in terms of matching what the enemy has, it is important for the Ukrainians, and in terms of their ambition to regain their own territory what was taken from the Russians, a tank is an important weapon system to be fighting the Russians and driving them from that territory that are actually still theirs. That's the military answer to that question.
Okay, next question is for Politico. Oh, sorry. Then we'll do, yeah.
Thank you very much. Emily Bauer from Politico. I have a question for General Cavoli. There appear to be some diverging views within the alliance about the implementation of the new force model, in particular when it comes to the speed of the implementation. So I was wondering how you are addressing these diverging views and when we can expect to have the plans finalized. Thank you.
Thanks very much. First of all, our alliance consists of 30 different member states, and each one has its own voice. And it's been my job to bring rigorous military logic into the conversation. After that, of course, nations have to decide to what extent they'll fulfill the force models and everything. So one of the big questions is, what is the size of the threat that we have to size our own force against? And that really depends on the horizon, the time horizon we're looking at. And part of that, of course, will be as much a policy decision as a military decision. So the way we're working on closing the gaps within the alliance is to discuss the capabilities, just as Philippe brought up, the capabilities versus the capacity of any given system, and by system I mean a warfighting system, not weapon system, and to make sure that we have a holistic understanding of what capabilities and what scale of it we need to execute a certain plan, and that we explore all the variety of ways of bringing that together. It's not always a matter of just adding one more tank battalion or something. So we try to look at it both directly and a bit obliquely to get to the most effective answer that gives us the greatest agility. And I'd like to point out that a very important part of this work is for my sort of current and near future planning efforts to dovetail with General Lavigne's future concepts and capabilities work at ACT. And that partnership, I think, is going to be an important part of making this transformation in the alliance into something that endures for a long time and always remains relevant to whatever challenges we face. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next question is for Frankfurter Allgemeine.
Thanks a lot. Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. My question is also to you, General Cavoli. Your colleague, Admiral Bauer, made the case for tanks. But of course, the specific discussion is about delivering Western-made main battle tanks to Ukraine. And I wonder how you perceive of that. Of course, from a strictly military perspective, are Ukrainians in need of this, and how quickly? And if I may add to that, do you see a specific risk to your area of responsibility if Western tanks are delivered to Ukraine? And do you think you can manage these risks? Thank you.
If I can, I'll start with the second question. Yes, I think we can manage any risks that we're dealing with. I think it's very important that people understand that the Committee of Military Chiefs of Defense that Rob runs gives plenty of advice to me and spends a lot of time discussing things with me from a national perspective. And then within the alliance structures itself, we have a variety of escalation management tools and a vibrant political discussion that helps us go through that. So can we manage risk? Yes, absolutely. I believe we can manage risk in general. With regard to tanks, I think Admiral Bauer put it very well, sir. There is not a particular weapon system that is a silver bullet. A balance of all systems is needed. In the end, a tank simply comes down to conceptually a balance between firepower, mobility, and protection. And there are a variety of ways that armies over the years have sought to provide that combination, that holy trinity of capabilities. So there are a lot of things that go into this question. With the question regarding Western tanks, I think it's clearly the case that Western technology, modern Western technology, is outperforming Russian technology. However, I would point out that it's not just tank on tank, it's the whole system. It's the supplies, it's the logistics system, it's the maintenance system, it's the target finding capability, and all of that comes together. So the complex of an army is much more important than any one of its individual parts. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much. Bruxelles 2.
Dan Michaels, Wall Street Journal. Given what you're seeing of the Russian performance and the depletion of Russian forces, both equipment and personnel, how does that figure into your planning and NATO's thinking about a potential conflict between Russia and NATO? Thank you.
Now, let me start. I think the threat assumptions on the work is logically the situation before 24 Feb 2021 or 2022. And I think we all agree on the fact, all the nations agree on the fact that whatever the outcome of the war, the Russians will most likely have similar ambitions. Even if they lose the war in Ukraine, they will continue to have similar ambitions. And therefore the threat does not go away, because it is now such that, especially in the land domain, the Russians have depleted some of their forces, their ammunition, their troops, their officers, their tanks, their infantry fighting vehicles, their artillery pieces. So the general belief is that the Russians will reconstitute what they had. They will also learn from this conflict themselves and try to improve what they had. So that will most likely, further down the road, have implications for our plans, not immediately, because it will have to materialize. And the discussion on how fast will the Russians be able to reconstitute to the pre-war situation, and then even improve, because they were not very successful in that on that moment when they invaded Ukraine, is going to take time. And is that 3 to 5 years? Is it 3 to 10 years? That is something we will have to talk about together. It is something that will be looked at by the intelligence services and will then find its way into the decision-making in a way that we will say, so for us to be able to be ready to counter that threat and to deter it, we will have to be ready in so many years from now. And that debate is then probably also a little bit an answer to your question. Is the military answer is what SECURE and SECT are providing. And then the advice goes to the political level. And then, of course, the nations decide on what to buy and when to buy it. And the time that we have to buy things and implement it and operationalize it is probably part of that equation of how much time does it take the Russians to reconstitute, and therefore how much time do we have to be ready, which also have to take into account the production capacity on our side. So it's a how do you say, vergelijking, an equation with many variables in that sense. But please.
Yeah. If I may, it's about the lessons we are identifying. And of course, you told about the Russian performance, but it's for us to know what doesn't work, of course, why it doesn't work, but also to learn how Ukrainians succeed to counter a gross capacity, a bigger capacity than they've got, and how also our Western equipment are used and what are their advantage. It's also for us very interesting, and as I say, to compare that to what we have thought before the war in terms of either operational posture, but also to tackle the challenge of the future. And for example, cognitive superiority or layered resilience. That means resilience and all the dependency between the civilian and military affairs, cross-domain command, integrated defense. All that big imperatives are at stake today because it's not only a regional war, it's the impacts are global, and the domains are not only the land or the air or the maritime domain. It's there were a huge competition before the war in the infosphere, for example, and there are still a huge competition. So for us, it's we have to understand everything in all the domains, and of course to make evolves our thinking about how to tackle the challenges.
In answer to your question directly, I couldn't possibly add to Admiral Bauer's. In fact, if you have a recording of it or something, I'd like a copy.
We are almost at the end. We just have time for one more question.
Hi, Max Delaney from AFP. Ukraine, the Secretary General, various allies have warned that Russia is preparing for a new offensive in Ukraine. According to you, do you believe this is the most likely next stage of the conflict? How soon could an offensive come? And how dangerous a moment are we in for Ukraine?
In general, if you look at the strategic objectives of the Russians, they haven't changed. So that is the reason why it is likely that the Russians will go for a next offensive. It's not something we know for sure, but that is based on that assumption that if they haven't changed their strategic objectives, then the most likely thing next happening in the spring is a new offensive. And therefore, that's what the Ukrainians have to prepare for. That's what they are thinking about. And that is what our assistance from, not ours in the sense of NATO, but the nations, the allies are looking at with Ukraine to see what the Ukrainians then most likely need most, and then how the allies can support them.
Okay, thank you everybody. That concludes this press conference. We wish you a good day. Thank you.